you know, flying either now or soon. Highly recommend it. And Lawrence and I have been, I don't know, talking about really interesting things with respect to flying and flying in space for a long time. And my hope is that in the near future, I'll be able to venture out to Hawaii again, and that we can talk about more of this in person too. That would be really nice. You know, I put together this little slideshow just to run through some of my experience instead of me just yammering on. And then I'm really looking forward to the questions and answers, because that's always the most fun for me, whether it's with kids or adults. That's always the best part. But I start with this slide because a lot of times I get asked the question, you know, what was it like to fly in space? And this one picture to me reminds me, actually, in one picture, what it was like to fly in space. And I was really blessed with the opportunity to fly 2 times, you know, once for that long duration flight for 91 days on the International Space Station, and then back to the space station for 13 more days on a shuttle flight. But, and I can tell you that seems like it's too quick when you know what it's like to spend a lot more time there. They had to pull my clawing hands off the hatch to get me back on the shuttle to come home, but just incredible experience. But I look at this picture and I know, you know, it's really beautiful, but I also know, even though, and this is the Space Shuttle Atlantis after my first flight, even though it looks like it's still and just kind of hanging there, I mean, I know that we're traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, or about 5 miles a second, which means that we travel around the planet once every 90 minutes. And because of that, we get one of these really beautiful sunrises or sunsets out the window. I also know that I'm on board that silhouetted shuttle, and you probably hear my dog eating in the background, sorry. Silhouetted space shuttle with my 5 crewmates, and we're on our way home from successful mission. And I know that my friend Jeff Williams, my crewmate, who I just spent a few months with on the space station, he's still there, and he's taking this really beautiful picture for a memory. Next slide, please, Lawrence. Mm-hmm. You know, you guys are there to fly, right? There is just something about separating from the planet. I don't care if that's, you know, a couple hundred feet above it in an airplane, thousands of feet above it in an airplane, or, you know, a couple hundred miles in space. There's something that's just inspirational about it in a way that I almost can't describe. This is one of the airplanes that my dad built when I was growing up. As a kid, he built small airplanes, usually aerobatic. The ones I remember the most are this Skybolt and a Stardust or 2. And in this, I am in this picture in the front cockpit, yet too small at that point to even have my head, you know, pop over the top. But he made sure that I would see things by giving a little roll or loop every now and then to give me the view of Earth and the tiny little houses and cars that were down below. But definitely thankful for parents that shared what they loved with me. I discovered that I not only wanted to fly myself, but I wanted to know how things fly. You know, and if you want to know airplanes fly, why would you not want to know how rocket ships fly? Next slide, please. I was very fortunate. I went to school at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach. I studied aeronautical engineering because at some point as I was getting ready to graduate from high school, I discovered that if you want to know how things fly, that's what you study in college. I'm actually very thankful that nobody told me how difficult engineering was, because I don't know if I would have chosen it on my own if I had known that, but thankful that I did. And I ended up working at the Kennedy Space Center on the space shuttle program for, you know, about 10 years there. And then later at the Johnson Space Center, and then selected as an astronaut. But I show this picture, beautiful shot, I think, of Endeavour on the runway. That's me in the purple shirt in the front. You know, that was the 80s, big hair days. And, but I love it because it's, in the end, I think it's all about the people. These people absolutely believe that the care and feeding of those spacecraft was their job. And at a point where you eventually get to fly on one, you're very thankful to know that that's the kind of people that work on them. Next slide, please. I interviewed to be an astronaut. I was probably about 9 years into when I was working at Kennedy, and I finally, you know, started thinking about the astronaut job as a possibility. Up to that point, I really thought, that's a job only other special people get to do. Why would they pick me? I don't, shouldn't even apply. And I'm very thankful to mentors that encourage me just to pick up the pen. There are things we have total control over that we sometimes deny ourselves of because we have this self-doubt. And, we need to take control of those things that we have control over. I didn't get selected the first time I interviewed, but, in hindsight, I'm so thankful actually that didn't happen, because I was offered a job out at Johnson Space Center to fly on the shuttle training aircraft, which is the airplane in the bottom left of this picture. It's a modified Gulfstream jet, modified G2. It was modified in ways that you would not, want Lawrence's airplane to be modified, or probably any of the airplanes that you end up flying unless you go do flight like this. I mean, the thrust reversers deployed in flight, the gear was put down at a time that was, a little different than what you might do as you were approaching for landing. We trained the shuttle astronauts how to land the space shuttle in this airplane. And so basically you were diving at the ground at like 7 times the normal glide path of an airliner. And then at about 2,000 feet, you do this pullback flare and then, touchdown on the runway, simulating slowing down from 17,500 miles an hour to, about 180 on the touchdown. I didn't think it could get any better than that. And to top it off, to get to and from where we would fly these airplanes, I got to fly in those T-38 jets, which I had been begging for my entire time working at Kennedy Space Center as astronauts came through to, to do their work there at Kennedy. Very fortunate. Next slide, please. In the year 2000, though, I was selected along with my classmates here. I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to speak to Ron, one of Lawrence and I's common mutual friends. One of my family's best friends in life is Ron Guerin. He's up in the top right of this picture. There are 2 gentlemen in this photo who are preparing to fly the first flight of the SpaceX crewed Dragon vehicle that is planned to happen at the end of the month. That's Doug Hurley and Bob Benkin. And our class is called the Bugs. We were selected in the year 2000. There was this whole worry about, computers crashing as all the zeros rolled into the computer system. And the class before you names you, they try to do it a little disparagingly, but we loved bugs because most bugs have wings, which means you get to fly. And what does, any astronaut want to do? I spent a lot of time on this picture with kids talking about how it takes all kinds of people coming together and different experiences, but we can move on to the next slide, Lawrence. I show you this picture because, when you talk about flying and flying in space, I think, honestly, there's been no more beautiful spacecraft than this one, than the space shuttle. I look at this picture as an artist. I look at it from kind of the beauty standpoint too, the aesthetic of it. I think there's no more beautiful picture than this one of a space shuttle rolling out to the launch pad. And this was the final time that Discovery was rolling to the pad for launch. You can see the pad off in the distance lit up. And I also like this picture because while it's like simply beautiful, there is complexity in this picture almost beyond imagination. When you guys are studying to fly in the airplanes, you're looking at the science about how the airplanes fly, the physical interaction with the airplane itself, how it's built and allows you to fly in the air. It's just incredible that as human beings, we can design and build and create something like this. And I think the same is true when we look at something like a space shuttle, where from top to bottom, there's complexity almost beyond imagination. And yet when we decide to do it, we can make really complex things happen. Next slide, please. And, in your training to fly, just like when we go to space, in a lot of cases, actually for the most part, when we're training to fly to space, you can't go to space to learn how to fly in space. So we spend a lot of time in simulators. This is just one of them that we use. It's a mock-up of a module on the space station called the cupola, which is like this bay window that faces towards Earth. And we have computers in there that we use to fly the big robotic arm. That's the big white crane, that like thing that moves around people and parts on the outside of the station. And this is a big domed like theater that we do that in. And it really is the next best thing to flying in space and doing the real thing. Next slide, please. And I think you guys will be doing a lot of that too, you know, in preparation for your flight training. In addition to really fortunately being able to get in the airplane with an instructor and fly, it is really helpful to get in a simulator and put yourself in really stressful and, you know, dangerous situations and use the checklist, use your ground control team to help you figure out how to solve that problem. This picture I just show you because it's got an airplane in it, you know, top left. I'm very thankful to my parents for sharing what they loved with me, and we are working very hard to do that same thing with my son. In the top left, you can see his little head popping up. Here, I'm going to open the door to let my dog out. That was his first small airplane ride. That's a Marchetti, and my friend Debbie Gary, who is an air show pilot, took us up and he got his first flight. He loved it. I didn't want to, like, you know, jinx it by, you know, thinking he has to love it, but he loved it. He's in flight training now through his high school, which I'm very excited about. And then I would, as much as possible, get him out to the training sessions for, you know, for flying in space. So he would know what I was going to be doing, and he would know the people that I was going to be doing it with. And in the top right picture, he's high-fiving my commander, Steve Lindsay, because he just successfully landed the space shuttle simulator. Next slide, please. You know, one day you get to go to space. You know, we could talk all day about this slide. I'm not gonna, but let me just tell you, you have this high expectation of what it's going to be like, and that it far exceeds anything you could possibly imagine in the way you shake and how quickly you get to space, like from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour and circling the Earth in 8.5 minutes. That's pretty incredible. And I highly recommend it. Next slide, please. Where I went both times was the International Space Station. Absolutely a masterpiece in space for so many reasons. I mean, it just is this beautiful spacecraft. If you were to lay that on the ground, it would be a little bit bigger than, you know, one of our football fields. The internal volume of the space station is, you know, about the size, we kind of equate it to a large 6-bedroom house. But it's even really bigger than that, because if you think about it, down here on Earth, we're limited, right? You know, we're limited to the floor we stand on. We kind of are moving in 2 dimensions. Up there, it's 3D. You can float up to your ceiling, hang on the walls. You know, you have all that extra space up there in space. And we are doing science that is all about improving life here on Earth. Everything that we do up there is about improving life on Earth, which is what I loved about being part of the program. And I think it's absolutely the best example of how we should be living as crewmates down here on Spaceship Earth. If you're not aware, we have been in partnership with 15 other countries, 5 other international space agencies for over 20 years, with crews representing those countries working together peacefully and successfully on this space station. And I highly recommend, if you haven't done it, get the app on your phone. There's one called Spot the Station, and there's another called ISS Tracker. You can put it in, you can put your zip code in, and it'll tell you when the space station is flying overhead. And you can watch it fly, this beautiful bright dot of light fly from one horizon to the other. And you can think about those 6 people up there representing, you know, representing the planet while they're there. Next slide, please. This is my obligatory, I got to do a spacewalk picture. Had the opportunity to ride on the end of the robotic arm. That's me strapped into the foot restraint, hanging onto a box that weighed, down here would weigh about 900 pounds. Up there, you know, I could move it anywhere I wanted, but would have to be careful so it didn't take me with it. Incredible to think about being at that point the most isolated I've ever been, even in comparison to what's going on right now, and absolutely the furthest person from the planet, and in just the most quiet, peaceful, comfortable place you could imagine. Next slide, please. This is another picture from the spacewalk, just because, you know, you're going through flight training, right? You're doing the ground school now, and at some point you'll probably be doing things in the airplane that your spouse or your children or your mom and dad might think, ooh, why are you doing that? It scares them, right? But you're going through the training, so you know that you understand what's happening. This is the picture for my mom. When she looks at this picture, she's like, this is why I was afraid while you were in space. There should be 2 hands on the space station rule at all times. Anyway, next slide, please. Just a little transition, the view out the window, very thankful for this picture. And next slide, please, Lawrence. And this one, this again is that cupola module that I showed you in the simulator. The most stunning horizon to horizon view of the planet, in addition to being that workspace that we would fly the robotic arm from. You know, if an astronaut is not working or sleeping, they are very likely floating in front of this window and just in awe of our planet and taking pictures and doing video to try to remember it, you know, and to share it. Very thankful that I had the opportunity to experience this. Next slide, please. This is just one of those views out that window. This is, when I got to space, I wanted to see Florida. You know, I considered Florida my home. If I knew I was going to be flying over Florida, I wanted to get my face to that window and see Florida. You can kind of see Florida coming in from the right side of the picture, sticking in there. And it's funny, I think if you speak to any astronaut, they will tell you that very quickly this transition happens where this place that you think of as home becomes this bigger idea of, you know, an understanding that we live on a planet and the planet is our home, and that place becomes just this special spot on that planet. Next slide, please. All right, this one, Lawrence, this is a little video, and I just wanted to show it to you. I had the chance to paint in space. I've been doing artsy kinds of things since retiring, and you know, with trying to use my own artwork to communicate the spaceflight experience, but also very fortunate to get involved with a program. We formed a foundation called Space for Art. We're working with kids around the world who are primarily in like pediatric cancer centers and refugee centers, and bringing their artwork together in these space themed projects. You know, behind me, you can see the flat version of one of them. But, you know, when you talk about flying, I mean, flying in space is just incredible. We're able to do that by going out on spacewalks because the company ILC Dover makes those spacesuits for us. They also have volunteered to put these suits together, but I wanted to show you the Unity suit flying through the space station, and it'll be coming up here soon. And then you can let it just play, Lawrence, once Unity. There you go. That one you can just let it play. And we got a couple of these suits up to the station and back. Just so cool to have the kids see their work, you know, fly to space like that. And I can tell you, every astronaut that sees these suits wants their suit to be like that now, right? They don't want just the white ones. Next slide, please. We can skip ahead. And I'm just going to close on this picture. This is absolutely, you know, when you think about who and where we are all together in space, I mean, we're all in space already, right? This is the picture I love, Earthrise, iconic image from the Apollo 8 mission, you know, almost 51 years ago. And it just reminds me of the 3 simple lessons I learned from flying in space. And that's that, you know, we all know them. We live on a planet, we're all Earthlings, and really and truly the only border that matters is that thin blue line of atmosphere that blankets and protects us all. And I'd like you guys to think about these things, you know, bring them back into your life if you don't already consider it. And when you get in that airplane and separate yourself from Earth that way, you absolutely can experience this same kind of awe and wonder that a person does when they fly in space. I don't think you have to go to space to experience this. So please just keep these things in mind. All right, I'll be quiet now.
No questions here. Let me just.
All right.
Very good. And there's some that came in the chat, but I'd like to maybe open it up with, you know, what advice would you give to some of the women in the class and in the audience here, especially the young women? We have a lot of young new pilots or new student pilots, you know, going forward and you know, with today, and what are the things that they need to do to follow in your footsteps?
Wow. Well, first of all, I'd say, you know, kudos for what you're doing already. I mean, the fact that you're, you know, already excited about something like aviation, like flying, and that you're pursuing it. You're taking the necessary steps to pursue it already. You know, you've picked up the pen, you filled out the application, right? I'd also say, and this is what I say to, you know, actually not just young women, but kids all the time, is that the rocket ship, the airplane, does not care if you're a boy or girl, right? So, you know, we do those kinds of things to ourselves, and we've got to be able to, you know, just like we separate from the planet in the plane, we've got to be able to separate from those ideas and just know that if we, if we feel it in ourselves that we want to pursue something like flying in space, whatever it is, you need to, I mean, you just need to take action on the things you have control of. And so high five for, signing up for ground school and get yourself off the planet, in a plane.
What was the hardest part of your career?
The hardest thing in my career? Wow. I think there's a couple things. One, first of all, deciding to pick up that pen, right? And so that was a difficult decision to make. I think the second thing was when it came to like just, from the astronaut standpoint, and this might sound a little weird, but as far as the training went, learning to speak Russian, that was probably the most difficult thing I had to do as part of that. And then in flying in space, just being separated from my family that way, I think was a difficult thing. Knowing that they would have loved to be there, but I was never really afraid of what might happen with the spacecraft. We train to deal with that as much as is humanly possible, just like you will in the airplane. But I was always afraid my son was 7 when I flew the first time. I was, my fear was that something would happen to him and I wouldn't be able to get home, to be there with him. Yeah.
Another question is, can you identify your mentors?
Yeah, well, and there's quite a few of them, especially in hindsight, when you think back to people that had, an positive influence on your life in some way. I showed you that slide, flying with my dad. I think we all maybe, hopefully think of our parents as that, in that way. I definitely do. My dad, my mom, for just sharing what they loved with me. I think that's huge. It gives you the opportunity to discover if you love the same things, and it gives you the opportunity to discover, nope, that's not for me, but here's the thing that I like. Several teachers in school that I can think of. One in particular was Miss Ransom, who taught in like my junior and senior year in high school. She taught like basic aeronautics, which at that time, it was just like the shock to me that you could even study something like that in high school. To me, high school is like, that's where you do the academic stuff you have to do. That's not like the fun stuff. And so I was really excited about that. And then later in life, those people that encouraged me to pick up the pen, and I'll just show you, I've got this thing and I usually just show it to kids, but one of the mentors I always think about is Jay Honeycutt. When I worked at the Kennedy Space Center, he was the center director there and the head of shuttle operations. But he's also a NASA engineer who worked on, helping to solve the Apollo 13 problems and, selecting astronauts later in life, and really, really critical things to the space program. And his motto is, here's how we can, not why we can't. And I have kept that with me. I mean, I have the little sign, there's a big version of it back over on the other side of the room. And I have kept that with me since the day I met that man. And it has had more positive impact on the way, problems can be solved, on the way I can deal with a lawyer if I'm having to talk to him, on pretty much every aspect of life when you're trying to, solve a problem. And I'm very thankful for Jay's influence on my life.
Anna's asking, would you go back to flying? Are you flying currently?
Well, I'm not right now, with all that's going on. Like I told you, my son is doing flight training as part of his high school program, which I'm so thankful they have it. And I haven't flown myself for a while, since retiring from the astronaut office, actually. But my goal has always been that as soon as he solos, I'm going to go back out to the same place where he's flying and get checked out and start flying again. And I really, really look forward to that, and to, just being able to spend some time in an airplane with him as he's flying me around too. That would be outstanding.
So, Nicole, a lot of people don't know that we are heading back to the moon. Can you brief us a little bit on what, when, and how?
Yeah, and I'm really excited about this. I'm all for us traveling, figuring out how to get to Mars, how to establish a presence on Mars. But I have forever been, one of these people that believes that us establishing a permanent presence on the moon is critical, not only to continuing to use space to improve life here on Earth, but also to providing us with a platform that is a much more efficient way for us to travel to Mars, to use this purpose-built space station that we have as the moon. NASA's goal right now is to get a lander back on the moon by 2024. I have my fingers crossed for that. I think there's a lot of things going on right now with some of the companies that NASA is in, like a public-private partnership with the work that NASA is doing independently, and bringing all of that together. That could potentially allow us to do that. I would say by the end of this decade, we should be actively in work, getting that permanent settlement in place, you know, on and in the moon. You want to live in the moon too. You know, it's a little dangerous to live on the surface for an extended period of time, but very excited about it. And one of the things that NASA is looking at as well is for that first flight back to the moon as a NASA crew, there will be at least one woman on that space flight, which is really exciting. I'm happy to do that. If they want to call me back, I'd be happy.
Awesome. Okay, let's see here. Other questions. Got time for maybe one or two more. Let's see. As a woman in the 80s, this is from Sergeant Lowe, were you ever brushed off by equal engineers?
You know, I feel really, really fortunate. You know, I went to a school, you know, where I studied engineering was Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I did that over at the Daytona Beach campus. You know, I just feel so fortunate that I never experienced that like very deliberate kind of thing. There were probably subtle things going on that maybe I was too silly, you know, too ignorant to recognize. But overall, through college, through my time at university, and then, you know, on to working at NASA, I just always felt welcomed. And the way that came about was, as long as people knew I was trying my best, like working hard to be part of the team and solving the problems we were doing. Now that doesn't mean I didn't see this happening with other people and always try to stand up for it. But I think NASA as a whole, quite honestly, has been very progressive over time with, you know, I'd like to figure out how they've done this too, you know, in terms of the overall demographic, not just women in the engineering fields and the astronaut office, you know, across the board, very positive that way. And, you know, we're in this time of like the 50th anniversary of the Apollo missions, right? And as part of the Apollo 11 mission, they did a lot of historic footage and things. And they showed footage from the Launch Control Center at Kennedy Space Center, where during that time frame, there was one woman, Joanne Morgan, on that control team. And smack dab in the middle of the control center, you know, young engineer. At Mission Control in Houston, there were no women. And now when you look at Mission Control, it's just this mass of humanity. You're not thinking, where's the Joanne, you know, in the control center? It's just this mix of humanity. And I'm happy to say that both of those facilities are run by women. And in the astronaut office right now, with a core of about 40 active astronauts, roughly 36% are women. And that's huge when you think about engineering colleges and other technical programs where those schools are struggling for like 20% enrollment. And that includes, you know, I work with it closely with Embry-Riddle. That includes the aviation side of things. I mean, there's a significantly less number of women pursuing the aviation side of things, even than engineering, I think. And we got to figure out a way to pick that up. I mean, I would actually ask, you know, Lawrence, I know you do a really good job with it in terms of promoting the people that are flying with you and the kind of experiences that you provide. But I would ask, you know, everyone that's participating in your ground school too. On my screen, I see Cecilia, and and I would just say, you know, and this is not just for the women that are participating, but, you know, as you're doing this, I mean, be present for young women, young kids in your life so they can see what you're doing. I think that's, you know, for me, that's like one of the greatest joys I've had, is just to know that whether they remember who I am or not, if a young girl can see me and see that I've done something that they might consider to be impossible or so challenging that they might not pursue it, and then they see me doing it, I really like to, you know, encourage people to do that. It makes a huge difference, especially for young girls. They really kind of need see it, be it, versus just thinking that they can do it.
And a note from Megan here saying, thank you for mentoring young girls like myself. We appreciate it.
Aw, thanks, Megan.
last question from me is, what's the deal with Tom Cruise? Can you tell us what?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I was surprised by that too. I'm really exciting as far as I'm concerned. I like the idea of, I mean, to me, it's kind of an alternative way to promote the space program too, through that kind of communication. NASA has not always done that kind of thing. I raised my hand and said, happy to fly with him if you need somebody to mentor him on his spaceflight activities. It'll be interesting to see how it develops. You know, it's going to depend on the new spacecraft and, you know, how the whole initial test flights on those things go. But, you know, how cool is that, that we're starting to think about, you know, somebody who's an actor going and using these space facilities for, you know, making a movie. But that to me just says that, you know, in our lifetimes even, there'll be more and more people having the opportunity to have this experience, and makes me very happy to know that. Yeah.
Can you share with everybody? I've got your Instagram up here, and how they can find you online.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Astro_Nicole. On Facebook, I think you can find me, just like search Nicole Stott. There's a couple ways to do that. I try to spread the word about the planet and the, you know, the good things going on out there with NASA and other things. And I share dolphins out my backyard. But I'd also encourage you to check out the Space for Art Foundation. That you can find on Instagram at Space for Art Foundation, and on Facebook. And if you have any kids that want to participate in our current project, please encourage them to do so. And we're trying to get kids in every country on the planet to participate this time. And, you know, not just children that are in hospitals and refugee centers, but with what we're going through right now, with everyone in isolation, everyone experiencing, you know, something just a little bit different than what their normal is. We want, you know, we want all the kids to join in. So, you know, Lawrence, thanks for having me here with you guys today.
The honor was all ours, and thank you so much for. I know you've motivated a lot of people here, and it was great to experience this. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And hey, everybody, enjoy your time in the sky.